being here, being the last panel on the second day. So shout out to y'all and give yourself a round of applause. I see my friend, City Council Member Carolina Rivera here. Yeah. Thank you. So I am Assemblymember Jessica Gonzalez-Rojas. I use she, her, pronouns. I very proudly represent parts of Western Queens, Jackson Heights, East Elmhurst, Corona, Woodside, Astoria. Anyone from Queens? Yay! I'm my Q66, Q33, Q32, Q49, Q47. I'm taking on my trains. Q7 train.
Q19.
Q19. So I'm really thrilled to have this really important discussion on transit equity and improving public transportation to better serve communities of color. This is again very personal to me as someone who's always been a strap hanger. I don't own a car. I have a license, but I don't own a car. So I advocate fiercely for the very system I rely on. And I'm a person who recently got hit by a car last January. Last January I was up here in a sling in a cast because I was crossing at a green light where I had in the crosswalk, and a car made a left and knocked me over. And thankfully, they stopped. I ended up in the hospital. I had a broken arm. That was the worst of it for me. But I know in my community across the city and state, that is not the case for so many. So many lose their loved ones, and because due to traffic violence. And we have to find ways to make sure that people can get around in our communities safely. And there's many ways to do that, and we're excited to talk about that. So I have an amazing panel, and I want to just give a quick introduction of folks, and then we'll get started. So I want to shout out to Danna from Riders Alliance, who's going to be here. Demetrius Crichlow, I made it more complicated, from New York City Transit. Here's Shawn Garcia in the end for Transportation Alternatives. We have Yvette Vasquez from 1199 SEIU. And we have Kim Smith from Vocal, New York. So the way I'm going to frame the conversation is sort of having a set of questions around what are the challenges, right? And then, because it's really important to set a lay of the land here, but also we want to get to solutions. So we'll have a set of questions on solutions, and then we'll give ample time for conversation Q&A. What? Oh, Brooke Powers is here? Council. Oh, there you are! Oh my God! Hi, stand up. Assemblywoman Brooke. City Councilwoman Brooke Powers is here. Thank you so much for being here. I also see Lisa Dalgan from the Permanent Citizens Advisory Committee, which I was a member of for 8 years, many years ago. But very proud to be a transit advocate and be here with advocates for strap hangers. So I will start, and then I'll sit down. So I'll kind of direct my questions to each person. So Danna, I want to start with you. As a longtime transit organizer and advocate, can you talk about what does transit equity mean? What does it mean to you? Why is reliable, affordable, equitable public transit crucial for the overall well-being of New Yorkers of color?
Hi, everyone. Hi. Okay, good. I don't know why I'm getting nervous. I've never been listening now. It's just coming on. But I'm going to be myself. So I have been fighting for transit justice for 11 years. And many of you have heard this story before, but I started as a volunteer. So it is very personal for me. Didn't start as a working position. In fact, I say when I showed up at many of our meetings, I came broke. I wasn't sure how I was going to get home, heavily relying on the two-way Metro cards that Riders Alliance gives out, and very happy for the pizza because I wasn't sure how I was going to eat dinner that night. And so it's very real. I've been taking New York City Transit my entire life. I'll be 42. And even though I live by way of Jersey now for the last couple of years, I still am in New York every day, trying to get on the subway, fighting for frequency, making sure folks are getting to work and school on time and various appointments, fighting for accessibility, because it is shameful that only 25% of our subway system is accessible fully and ADA compliant, right? Like, what's happening with that? And like you have had injuries where I needed an elevator, and I don't think I should have to like explain that, right? Folks have invisible disabilities that don't show up in ways that you see, and they need a seat, and they're in pain. I have been on the subway in pain. I've been on the subway pregnant. I've been on the subway looking for someone to help me carry my baby stroller up and down the steps when my husband wasn't around. So it's a big deal. And I have been bus dependent. If you've ever taken the B47 in Brooklyn, down Ralph Avenue, you know it's a hot mess. But you go a few blocks over to Utica, and that B46 is running like water. So I was like, what's happening? Why is one bus, you know, so great in the same neighborhood, and here I am right in Crown Heights again, and this bus is horrible. So those things are what I'm looking at when I talk about transit justice. Why are some stations getting it better and others are not? We're going to get into that later. But it's personal, it's part of my story, and it's really fulfilling to do this work and continue to fight for transit justice.
Thank you. You can pass the mic to Shawn. So Shawn, tell us about your work fighting for safer, more walkable streets that put people at the center, and why is increasing access to transportation options like biking and walking so important to the communities you organize in the Bronx and across the city?
Thanks so much. It's great to be here. First of all, I just want to say how important having this space for us to have this conversation is. We know this weekend is very significant for our folks, and it's great to be in a room talking about transportation where we don't have to code switch, and we can just be straight up about our experiences and what it means for us and our communities. I come to this work as a native New Yorker, born and raised in East Harlem in the Bronx. Started taking public transportation in the 90s when I was in grade school and riding my bike in the 90s. You can see the gray hairs. But, my relationship, like many of ours, is very personal, to Danna's point. Like, we are, our experience with transportation, how it serves our community, how it does not serve our community, is something that impacts every layer of our livelihood. How we get to work, how we get to school, how we transport our children, all the things that we need to do on a day-to-day basis, how we access our communities, whether it's New York City, Rochester, Buffalo, how you get around is going to impact every layer of your life. I've been an organizer for over 20 years, working in various social justice spaces, and not in the transit space specifically, but when I started working in the transit space and organizing in the space, it was the first place where the interconnection between the different issues, racial justice, immigrant rights, queer rights, all these things came to a head around transportation, and it just became such a great place for me to spend my professional career. And I also think we need to talk about, when we're talking about improvements for transportation, more reliable public transportation, safer streets, bicycle infrastructure, that's a very different conversation for people of color. That is, just because a bike lane was built in a neighborhood does not mean that biking is available to folks in that community. As a man of color, when I am on a bicycle and I'm going through a neighborhood and I look the way I look and I'm, riding in our streets and being in our public space, the risk of racial profiling, of discrimination, of being harassed by the cops, of being stopped by the police, all those things are a very real experience. As a teenager, going into public transportation and, seeing the cops around the corner kind of waiting for all the young kids of color to, that they say are going to try to jump the turnstile, all these kind of things, that experience is very different for us. So I think we need to ground ourselves in this conversation. We're not just speaking about better transportation, but specifically better transportation for people of color, and that's a very, very, very different thing.
Thank you. And actually, I want to highlight a really interesting point. In the governor's budget, there was a proposal to change the regulations around e-bikes and the weight of e-bikes and classify them as mopeds. But you think about deliveristas, right? People who are largely immigrants and people of color who rely on these, bicycles to get around the e-bikes. And if you're, changing the regulations, you're potentially criminalizing the use and not having insurance or license or all the things that might come with changing its designation, then that Khalil, you gotta come up here. Then that actually targets specifically communities of color and very vulnerable communities right now in this administration. So thank you for that. Yvette, Mike's right there, right for you. So Yvette is from 1199, and I love that you're here because 1199 is known as a union of healthcare workers. And, you know, I get very instinctively the connection between health justice and transit justice. But can you share why this issue is important to 1199 and why you're involved in this fight for transit equity?
Absolutely, thank you. So many layers. First of all, just speaking about my own issues with transit, you know, as a young person, my mom worked for the MTA actually, so even we had issues with affording getting on the buses, and we were only able to get on because she was an employee of MTA, so this goes back for 40 plus years. But as for our membership, some of our lowest paid workers, our home care workers, which are, they play such a vital role in taking care of all of our seniors at home, and it's very hard for them to get around the city, not to mention for transit deserts, but because of their pay. Not only for our home care workers who are in New York City, but outside of New York City for our home care workers who do not have wage parity with our aides in the city. They make even $3 less outside of the city, so that impacts them even further. And if you think about their roles, sometimes they're going to multiple homes in a day, so they have several cases, and if you're paying for transit each time you're getting on to another case, not to mention when I get out of work, I have to pick up children, I have to go shopping, I have to get the food, I have to get back home. This all adds up. You know, the time that they spend on transit also adds up. It makes it so that they don't have time to better themselves. You become time poor, right? So you don't have time to get out of work and go to school or get out of work and do anything but your regular things that need to keep you going every day, right? And also our Southeast Queens.
Yeah.
What a big transit desert, not to mention Far Rockaway, where the Assemblyman is from, already has geographic issues. So on top of that, with unreliable service, it just compounds. And then to touch on ADA compliance, if you're in a wheelchair, you don't notice the little gaps. So you and I who can step over them, not a problem. But for patients who have any kind of mobility issues, it makes it even harder. Like Danna said, if you have to travel to a station that is ADA compliant, then to start your journey, you can see how this is going to impact care. Our home care workers can't get to their cases on time. They can't take their patients to their appointments on time. And so this leads to poor health in these communities. And again, it affects our communities more than others.
Yes, intersectionality. Thank you. I want to give another shout out to Councilmember Sylvester Brooke Power. She's the chair of transportation and also represents the Southeast Queens region, which has historically been a transit desert. So her voice is really important in this fight. I want to introduce for a moment Khalil Anderson, Assemblymember Anderson, who's my friend and colleague and a fierce advocate for transit justice, who's also co-sponsoring this panel alongside me. So let's give a warm welcome to Assemblymember Anderson.
Thank you so much, Assemblywoman, and thank you to this panel. Let's give them all a big round of applause. I'm grateful to be co-sponsoring this panel, but also to be someone who's an advocate for transit equity, just like the Assemblywoman said. Now, our focus this year is, of course, making sure that we get more investments in public transportation, because we know that it's a thing that works to move the most amount of New Yorkers. But we know that when we don't invest in transportation, we see the communities like mine and like Jessica's and like many of the people who are here today, those communities be divided. And so I'm grateful that we have our friends at Riders Alliance here. Danna, it's so good to see you. Let's give her a round of applause. I think it was a year or two ago, we did a tour of the district from north to south. And it took us about 2 hours to get there by public transportation. And these are the challenges that our constituencies are faced with. And I'm glad that the MTA is here because we're seeing changes, but we of course have to push for more. Right? We have to make sure that we expand fair fares and ensure that groups and organizations and people can, we can clap that up. Have access to it, and I know Councilwoman and Chair of Transportation, Sylvester Brooke Powers, has been a champion of that, but also making sure that we have access to our bus networks. I know that Queens, Jess and I know Queens is under a massive redesign of its buses, and I know, and it's good to see her jumping back in again. But we've all been a part of making sure that that bus redesign meets the needs of our constituents and our diverse communities, and also make sure that we connect people from end to end. But lastly, as I close out, we have to be bold, right? One of the bold things that has come out of this legislature is a free bus pilot. That was bold, because we know that cost prohibitive actors impact the way people access transportation. Secondly, bold looks like making sure that we can have access to new routes and new ways to get around. And so that means ferry access. That means expanding that and looking towards bigger ideas to help New Yorkers get around. So I'm thankful for this panel. I will decrease and increase the more qualified folks to speak on this, but I thank you all for allowing a few brief minutes for me to just address it.
Thank you. We're in the fight together. So a lot of us are from New York City and are talking about transit from a New York City perspective, but Kim is a very important voice because she represents folks in Buffalo and Rochester and the Hudson Valley, as well as New York City, for sure. Vocals out there, but it's you have a broad sense of some of the disparities that many communities of color face when trying to live their lives, right, and access, be able to move freely and accessibly. So can you talk about some of the issues and the ways in which you see transit equity, and particularly the ways it impacts communities of color who are often most vulnerable?
Certainly. I think the thing that had me the most excited was actually the title of this conference and listening to Assemblyman Be Bold. Because the discriminatory land use, the way they have taken down our projects and built highways, that took bold action. And so it is going to take bold legislation to get us out of this mess. And so the key word for vocal, and I want to acknowledge our vocal leader in the space, Danita Jefferson, but with vocal, we have always prioritized ending mass incarceration, ending homelessness, ending the overdose crisis, ending HIV. And when we found out about the disparities and the inequities in transportation, we jumped into the New Yorkers for Transportation Equity Coalition. We were all in. Because the key word for us here is equity. So we know that with equity, equity is about creating a standard, right? And then making sure that everyone has what they need, primarily the people on the bottom, making sure everyone has what they need to meet that standard. And with transportation, for us, the standard is connectivity, right? Connectivity to food, to shelter, to housing, to life-saving medical treatment. And our vocal leaders ride the bus. And so when Danna mentioned, being once reliant on the bus passes, so many nonprofits, vocal included, was all about the bus passes, right? That's what equity looked like. Give our folks bus passes so that they could get around. So when we got into this and we got more educated about Riders Alliance, and they encouraged us to go and talk to our members and get their stories, we were astounded. Because our members range from Staten Island to Buffalo. And what we found were members who were experienced domestic violence situations, who were placed in housing that was sometimes outside of city limits and still had to get to their medical appointments, but the buses wouldn't go out there. We experienced people who are HIV positive, who were missing appointments and getting sick because buses weren't running either on time or there wasn't enough frequency and stops. We experienced a lot of our people who were looking for jobs who had to be forced out of their jobs because they were stranded at work, could not get home, walking home from a suburb into the city. And so when we talk about transportation equity, the cost of not taking care of our black and brown, low income, most vulnerable communities, the cost of that is what we have already seen. We have been going by this building and they will come practice, where we build it and they come, but our people aren't coming because they can't damn it get there.
Yeah.
And so what we see, our communities are rich in resources, but very poor in outcomes. And that is where we will stay unless we invest in better transportation. And that vocal, we want to see more frequent routes, bus stops. We want the creation of more routes. We want free busing for those living at and below the poverty level. And we want more bus structures, because if our people have to walk almost a mile to get to a bus stop, they deserve a bench and some covering there when they get there. So for us, that is what transportation equity looks like.
Yes. Give a round of applause. Demetrius, you represent the lifeblood of New York City. 6 million riders daily on our buses and subway in New York City. Not to mention, the Long Island Railroad and Metro North. How does the MTA hold itself accountable to delivering for our passengers, especially in places that are often transit deserts, places where there are large percentage of communities of color who might be low income? What are some of the solutions, what are some of the challenges, because we're focusing on challenges, but how are you looking at solving these problems and delivering equity for our communities?
Thank you for that. So I was wondering why I was the last person.
Hear it all. I want you to hear it all.
And then I hear the panelists, and I said, oh my goodness, I see the setup. So look, we are, without question, the largest transportation network in America, North America. And there is no transportation network anywhere you go that is as great as what we have, right? The subway system, there is no subway system in North America better than what we have here. There's no bus network better than what we have here. And there is no accessoride program more aggressive that services as many people as what we do in New York. Those are facts, right? But the reality is New York is special, right? New Yorkers want everything, right? And listen, I'm born and raised in New York, so I get it. I totally get it. We have a responsibility.
Yes.
And when we run our service, whether it's subway, bus, or paratransit, we have people who are reliant on us. They're very vocal, right? And it's hard sometimes to hear all of the voices, right? But I think the one thing, I might not be close.
Oh, close again.
Sorry about
Hard to
that.
hear.
I said all of this stuff. For those in the back, I just said all these pearls of wisdom.
All the solutions you just delivered.
I'm just done now. I think, for us, we do have a responsibility to listen. We've done a lot in the last couple of years to ask questions, to ask how can we be better servicing communities. I think the reality is for us, most of the areas that have an equity challenges are our bus riders, right? And so, I can tell you that Frank, who's the head of buses, for him, it is all that we drive to. How can we improve upon buses? What can we do better? And the Queens Bus Network redesign is a really good example of what you can do if you take feedback from customers and you say, what could we be doing better? We don't have endless dollars, right? That's a fact. We do not have endless dollars. If you want to give me endless dollars, I will do endless work. But that's not the reality that we live in. We have a select budget, and we got to do everything we can within that budget to be able to service our customers. right? So we got this money to do the Queens bus network redesign, and it was like, wow, like here's an opportunity to make a real difference. How can we make Queens more connected? How can we shorten the commute of riders? Like, we tried to think of different ways of providing rush routes so that you can have almost an express trip. Hit these stops right up front and then straight to where you need to go. Recognizing the challenges that some of these areas have, Far Rockaway being a great example. But it takes us listening. And that's what we've really spent a lot of time doing, listening to our customers. Our subway system has been, challenged in several different ways. You turn on the news, we're generally on there every day, right? It has its challenges. But in the last 2-3 years, we've had the best subway service that we've had in 10 years. You may laugh. I'm not saying that we're perfect, but it is the best subway service that we have had in 10 years. The numbers don't lie. 85% of trains get to where they need to go on time. The 15% are the ones we need to work at addressing. Now, the capital program that everyone talks about, which is billions of dollars, takes a 100-year-old system, 100 years old. Tell me something that you have in your house that's 100 years old and still works. The system is 100 years old. That means that we're not talking about just the things that you see. The things that operate behind the scenes that you never see. It's 100 years old. Do you know that in order for us to run cars, we have substations, power lines that drive power into our trains? You just see the trains moving, but the systems themselves are old that power them. So we have a responsibility to do repairs to them. When you have delays, it's because those systems are breaking down. So the money that's tied to this capital program is infinitely important to the people who are in this room and every rider in New York City. I can't stress it enough. It's not just about buying new cars. Go to some place, they're like, oh, I love traveling over there, where they replace the cars every 20 years. We have cars that are 45 years old, right? And we still maintain at 85%, right? That's our job. Can we keep delivering? Can we keep delivering? What happens when your 45-year-old car is operating, right? That's what I'm saying. The subway system, the buses that we have, they have to be maintained in order to provide the service that people expect and deliver. The systems of the future are like real, right? So one of the things that I'm always passionate about is like, what could we be doing in the future, right? It's not just about like how we got to where we are, how do I provide better service today? That is like, yes, I gotta do that, right? But the reality is, what do I need to do to provide better service tomorrow, right? 2 years from now, 3 years from now, what advancement do I need to be investing in? We talk about computer-based train control. How do I provide better service? And it means that we need to change where we are. The system that we have cannot be the same system if we're gonna operate better. And it means the technologies that other systems have easily taken over, we need to do the same thing and change. So, listen, I can tell you that I'm committed to doing things better. I'm committed to this job. I'm committed to New York. But it is not an easy job. And the work is not for the lighthearted. No matter where I go, there's always going to be somebody who gives me a complaint. But I'll tell you that if you really looked at what we offer our people in New York, there is nothing like it.
Thank you. And Demetrius, I'm going to actually stay with you, and we'll go back down the line. So we're going to move to solutions. And besides my bill that will allow for fare fares to increase for 200% of federal poverty level, what else are the opportunities to create greater transit equity? What are you looking at? What are some of the solutions you're looking at right now? You kind of led us into some of the things you're working on. The Queens Bus Redesign Project was just approved and rolled out. That was a very arduous process. It initially came out with not the most positive reviews, but you pulled back and listened, and I really appreciate that. And we're almost there. It's great. There's some concerns I still have, but overall the process was much more improved, and I think we got to a better product, so thank you. But what else are we thinking about right now in terms of transit equity and providing the resources to reach those that are often least able to access the system?
So, I think the Queens, as you mentioned, Queens was great.
To the mic.
Sorry. The Queens bus network redesign was a really key piece. So Brooklyn's up next, right? We took some of the most difficult boroughs and started with those, right? It is important to be able to make sure that those folks have those same opportunities. You know, the amazing thing about the subway system or the bus system is it allows for anyone, no matter what your income level, to be able to pay the same amount of money to get to opportunity, right? So you can get on a bus, on a subway for $2.90, whether you're rich or you're not, and get to that job, that great paying job, right? The same opportunities, the same doctors, the same plays, it gives you opportunities. So I can tell you the things that we've been investing in, particularly lately, have been how do we provide better service? If you talk about, again, CBTC, computer-based train control is something that we've been rolling out on the EF and R line, adding new cars to our system. Staten Island is a borough that has gone without for a very long time. They literally have the oldest cars that we have in our subway system are in Staten Island. Ancient cars, ancient. Those cars are all gonna be brand new within a year's time, right? So looking at the actual assets that need to be repaired, listening to our customers and saying like, because it's our goal, obviously, if people aren't happy with the service that we give, like, I'm not doing my job. So our goal is to be able to find all of those answers that are out there to questions that just completely continue to come our way. So.
Thank you. Danna? So for Demetrius to be able to do his job, he needs to hear from the riders, right? And Riders Alliance is amazing at organizing riders. Can you talk about what are the challenges you face in lifting those voices, but also elevating the solutions? Because many of us know that those most closest to the pain and the problem are most closest to the solutions. And those are the people that should be at the front line of speaking to the MTA, speaking to us as legislators, advancing ideas and visions around what can be done. So can you talk about like how you do this work in terms of the organizing part, and then what's on the horizon?
Yeah, thank you. So listening to Demetrius' answers just now, it actually brought some things to mind, right? Because I heard him speak a lot from like, and this is very much your job, so that's right. But I heard you speak a lot from like the data point of view or the numbers. And I think for me as a community organizer, it's really important that we have the human side to this, the stories, the Judy's bus is late, she couldn't get to work, Victor's accessorize not on time, and he's not gonna make it to his appointment. What does that mean for Arnold? You know, when I think you said the Q19, what does it mean on the other side? Like I have literally had my pay docked. I've had supervisors that are going to write me up. I may lose my job. When we talk about access, I cannot go to this university or school because it's in a place where there's no transit that allows me to access, right? So like how do we continue to bring, first of all, as organizers, those stories to the agency so that when they are making policy decisions, there is that lens around what are the real needs on the other end of that decision. And then I think another thing when we talk about solutions are really like, let's look at this room. So I'm sitting next to Demetrius. He is the first, and we're in 2025, the first Black president of the MTA. Yes. And we want to celebrate that. But then there's also like a why point of view to that, right? When we talk about outdated transit, when we're talking about 45-year carts, we have to say that for years that means there has not been an investment in transit. There has not been folks who have said we have to make sure, right? And so like for those of us who are trying to uplift the work, and not just those of us, for myself as a Black woman, because let's be real, transit is a space that is a white male-dominated space often, right? And so when I step into the room and I'm talking about transit, a lot of times I have a heavy lift not only for those who work at the agency, but even within my own community. It's not often seen as a social justice issue, but it is a social justice issue. I know that because when I'm in my own community, I see us at the bus stops. I see Black and brown women who look like me, who are home health aides, which is what I used to be when I came to this work, who are trying to get to their next case. I see my aunties, my grandmas, my uncles. I see them driving the bus. I see them as train operators. I don't often see them at headquarters. I know people who they put their whole hopes and dreams into that MTA application when they wanted to apply, right? But it wasn't at 2 Broadway where they got the job. It was, oh my goodness, they called me, they pulled my number, I'm gonna be a bus driver. I'm gonna have good benefits. What does this mean for my household? So how do we make sure that we have more of a lived experience in the rooms when budgets are being passed, policies are being approved, right? Not just here in Albany, yeah, but in the rooms at 2 Broadway. So when we're talking about upcoming fare hikes, when we're talking about the capital plan, we need to be in the room. Because we have valuable lived experiences. Those of us who have waited for the bus for 45 minutes when there was no shelter, no seat to sit on, like Kim said, those folks need to be in the room. That's solutions to how we're gonna move forward in transit. Because if we don't have folks that are riding transit, experiencing the hardships of transit, putting your 2 nickels together to afford transit, making these decisions, then we have a mixed match. Something's wrong. And so that's what I'm saying when I say solutions as an organizer.
Yes. We left the best panel for last year. Yvette, labor is such a critical voice in this fight, and the fact that you're here and you both connected the dots on like the home health care workers and those working class communities that rely on the system to do their job and to live their life. And that's the voice of a union leader is very powerful. How are you connecting with other unions in making transit equity part of a priority? And how are you working with the transit workers union, right? Those workers, those bus drivers, those bus operators, those train operators. What is the connection in the union space on this issue in which so many working class union members rely on this very system to get to their jobs?
Sure. Just to touch on what Danna said about that golden ticket from MTA, right? Like, I'm a product of someone who got that golden ticket, you know? And so I know firsthand what it means to be in a family that can benefit from that. And realistically, labor is all throughout this conversation, right? Labor doesn't only ride the system, but they build the system, right? So they're all in this. And I think that one of the things we could be looking at is, as far as people who are building the system, increasing skills so that we can upgrade the same way that they want to upgrade the system, upgrade our workers' skills, you know? And at 1199, one of the things that we pride ourselves on is meeting our members where they're at, right? We ask them what they need. What is it that is going to help you get to your job on time? Just last week, for an example, a member mentioned in Southeast Queens an issue where they have the e-bikes and scooters scattered around, this is an issue, and how did we find this out? Speaking to our members. So other unions can benefit from the same thing, speaking to their members to see what it is that they need in their communities, how they can get involved. We speak to our members and we ask them, members in Brooklyn, we have them come out when there's rallies for the bus lines, because this affects them directly. And when you connect the dots for membership and show them this is how you can move the work and get improvements that you need, they are more willing to come out and do things like that. And so I think not only for 1199, how we connect with our membership, but all unions need to be doing the same thing so that we can all come together and see how we can work together. Because like I said, we ride the system, we build the system. So those unions right there can work together in having a voice and saying, this is what we need to improve everything for the well-being of everyone in the city.
Amazing, thank you. And Kim, you really painted us a picture, right, for those that are outside of New York City and there's particular challenges that they experience with a lackluster transit system. Can you talk about the ways in which you're organizing your members around these issues? How are they working with state and local government on this issue? And what are the solutions that they're pushing forward to create better transit equity in communities outside of New York City?
Great question. I think first of all, it was so nice to hear Demetrius talk about the importance of listening and Danna talking about that. And I believe it's listening, learning, and implementing. Because in the words of Frederick Douglass, if we're organizing and building power, power conceives nothing without a demand, right? So what are we demanding by way of solutions? So very happy to know about your bill, powerful bill. Vogel is also pushing for a bill called VMT, Vehicle Miles Traveled. The name is not very powerful, not very attractive, but what this bill will do is create a task force that will go to the Department of Transportation and ask very specific questions regarding highway projects. You know, because when we talk about legislation, we need equitable legislation. Legislation that isn't going to benefit the majority and leave our people behind. So there is going to be a task force that would have those conversations with the DOT, and it is in those conversations where we can insert our voice to make our demands known. And so it's so nice to know that there are local elects in the room, because what these elects can do is you can get with your council colleagues and create memorializing resolutions, you know, to say, hey, we in the city of Rochester, or when in whatever city, we support this legislation for our people. Send it to the governor's office. Excuse me, send it to other state elected officials. It is what we are working on doing with the Vehicle Miles Traveled legislation. We've done it in Rochester. We're looking to do it in Buffalo. We're looking to have those resolutions done in Syracuse so that we can begin to build our argument and the need for equity in terms of transportation.
Amazing, thank you. And Shawn, what's on the horizon for transportation alternatives? I know one of our big fights last year was Sammy's Law. It was named after a 12-year-old boy, Sammy, who was killed by traffic violence. I think every time I met with Sammy's mom and the advocates, I cried, knowing that, you know, so many lives were lost due to traffic violence, and it's just heart-wrenching to hear over and over and over again. And then in my own district, seeing children and older adults and neighbors die due to traffic violence, and feeling like we weren't doing anything about it was infuriating. So getting Sammy's Law passed was incredibly emotional. It would allow New York City to lower its speed limits, because actually Albany controls the speed limits of New York City, oddly. So now New York City has the ability to lower the speed limits. So that was a huge victory, and thank you for your leadership on that, and the whole, like, all the activists that came up week after week after week after week to fight for that. Lot more to do. So let's talk about what's on the horizon for transportation alternatives and thinking outside of the bus and transit infrastructure and micromobility. Let's talk about micromobility and safe streets.
Yeah, so you know, when we're talking about public transportation, safe streets, you know, equity in transportation, we know that the data also shows that it disproportionately impacts our communities more than others, right? There's more kids of color getting hit by cars because the infrastructure in their neighborhood does not support safe passage for pedestrians, drivers, and other forms of transportation. That is statistically true, right? We see that people who can't access, you know, public transportation, bicycle infrastructure, other forms of micromobility, is disproportionately in communities of color. And so when we're talking about the solutions, right, we know the harms, right? We have a history of disinvestment. Disinvestment in transit solutions, disinvestment in safe street solutions. We have a history of racism and racial profiling in our systems. We also have a history of environmental racism. I see our folks from We Act, our EJ folks in the space. We can't also forget that many of these highways that continue to be invested in, like Kim was speaking to, are cutting through communities of color, low-income communities. That's a history that we as New Yorkers live with, and it's still present day.
Yep.
So the solutions have to be rooted in that. I know we're a little short on time, so there's so much I can talk to, but I really want to speak around immigrant rights in transportation. I saw Lahia. Lahia, are you in the room still?
Yeah, yes.
From Workers' Justice Project and the delivery workers. Big shout out to Lahia and all the work that they do. We know that there's a very vulnerable moment that our communities of color, and especially immigrant communities are facing right now with the Trump administration. The threats against, transportation funding and other social services, but also to the racist and xenophobic targeting of immigrant sisters and brothers. Our delivery workers is one of the most vibrant, workforces in New York City, but all around the country. We've seen the last few years delivery workers, the boom in the working cyclists, but delivery workers who sometimes are just seen as silent users of our transit system are 2/3 of our users in the bicycle infrastructure right now are delivery workers. And delivery workers are disproportionately, targeted by police, stopped by police, claims of them being on improper e-bicycles or riding on sidewalks or disregarding speed and making it dangerous for other users. I want us to all kind of pull that off of our eyes, pull that wool off our eyes. That racism and xenophobia that's being told to us about delivery workers and immigrant brothers and sisters who are working delivery folks is just that. It's lies. That is not the reality. The person who is a delivery worker, this is a very viable source of livelihood for them. Right? When there's immigrant populations in our society, there are very few places that people can find employment. And delivery working is one of those avenues. And this worker is just trying to get from point A to point B. And they're working for predatory app companies who have designed algorithms that are forcing them to move at speeds and to make deliveries over many stretches of miles in unreasonable time, penalizing them if they have to stop at a stop sign. Did you know that? If they stop and they're idle for 30 to 45 seconds, they're at risk of losing their job. And there is no regulation over these app companies. The streets are not being designed to deal with the increased usage of bicycles and e-bicycles on our streets. I know it's a very real concern for us, right? No one wants to be struck by an e-bike, and no one who's on an e-bike wants to be in that kind of situation. Those friction points, though, can be solved. There are designs that can be implemented that will solve those issues. Double wide bike lanes, protected bike lanes, more clearance at corners and intersections in the form of daylighting. These things exist, but of course, in communities of color, in the outer boroughs, we see less and less of them. So let's stop attacking each other. Let's stop attacking immigrant workers. Let's realize that who we have to hold accountable is the app companies and city agencies that need to invest in making sure that this workforce is protected.
That's right.
Yes, thank you. Something I always say about street design is that there's 3 mechanisms when we think about street design. There's education, enforcement, and engineering. Education is important, but it's not always accessible. It doesn't always get out to people that that use the system. Enforcement is often predatory and targets, again, communities of color. But when we engineer, when we design the streets in a way that are safe, then we solve problems. That's how we solve problems. So street design is so critical. I'm thinking about how do we make the streets accessible and safe to the many ways in which it's used. And I think that's a really important point, something we've been thinking about in my district where we're building bike boulevards and we have an open street. And there's a lot of opposition. I mean, it's wild how much opposition that we get to closing a street, and we say opening the street actually to pedestrians and cyclists and runners and folks with their baby strollers, and we do Zumba and this. I mean, it's wonderful, and yet we have a very loud, I would say minority of folks, but very loud, that are in opposition for that. there's a really strong carter culture that we're up against. So thank you for what you shared, and we always have to think about the ways in which some of these laws and policies disproportionately impact communities of color, immigrant communities, working class communities. So I'm gonna give folks a few minutes to think about their closing remarks, and I wanna open it up for questions before we do that. We have about 10-15 minutes for questions, and then we'll close with like an action statement from each of you. So I will be Oprah. I will come to you. I see your hand in the back.
Pretty loud too, I think.
I have a hearing disability, so I always ask people to speak in a mic.
Hey everyone, my name is Lonnie Portis. I'm the Acting Director of Policy and Legislative Affairs for We Act for Environmental Justice. First of all, I didn't know Writers Alliance rolled so deep. But my question is kind of, we talked a lot about some of these different challenges that we have when it comes to public transportation. Can you guys all talk as like advocates and as legislators? What I feel sometimes is the upstate downstate divide in terms of getting some of these things that are needed downstate in New York City, which are irrelevant and have no political consequences for someone who represents a suburban car, driven area upstate. And like, how do you guys work through that and to get these things passed? Because everyone here wants a lot of the same things. We want an improvement in our public transportation system. We want physical access. We want economic access. So like, all these things are like no-brainers. We know what the problems are and what we need to fix, but it's like, you get to that political issue. So like, how do you guys work together, or how do you get through that impasse and that challenge?
That's a question for me, but I actually want to hear from the panelists. So does anyone want to chime in on that? And I could actually share my thoughts, but I'd love to hear from the panelists first.
I'll chime in a little bit. Kim might want to add to it as well. So I will say, for the first time, and I've been working on transportation justice for years, and this is the first time we've ever had a statewide campaign. We just recently relaunched, a little bit of a launch last year, but we have a strong force this year, and Kim was touching on it earlier. So we have a coalition across New York State called New Yorkers for Transportation Equity. NIFTY is our nickname. And so about maybe a week ago, we were just up here, and this is everyone from Buffalo to Brooklyn. Like, literally, if you're in Rochester, Albany, the Bronx, Herkimer, it doesn't matter. Whatever stretch of New York you're in, we need your help to speak to your statewide legislators. We just got our bill numbers. I'm not going to quote them because I don't know by name, for 2025, 2026. But hopefully you all can follow up with one of the organizers from Writers Alliance, from Vocal. 1199 is helping us with that work, but this is strong NTA, strong coalition work across the state, and we need all hands on deck. Right now, our sponsors for the bill are Assemblymember McMahon and our Senator Gennardis out of Brooklyn, New York. And so, yeah, whatever part of New York State you are part of, we are looking to hopefully get that bill passed, and hopefully a lot of the oversight that Kim was speaking on not only can look at how we can reduce vehicle miles traveled, but also how we can then take that funding and reinvest it so that folks in Albany, in Rochester, in Buffalo, in Long Island can have, mostly we're talking about bus service, because that's what we're seeing upstate. We're hearing stories of folks who just have limited access. But yeah, subway in the city as well, but just equitable transit.
And the only thing that I would add to that, I thought that was perfect. The only thing that I would add to that is when we're talking about equity, we're also talking about equitable investment into every mode of transportation and making sure that every mode of transportation is environmental friendly.
Yeah.
So there's a place for everyone within the coalition. So I would encourage you to get involved. Like Caitlin is here front and center. We can get your information. And I think the other piece of that, the coalition also has a policy team. And on that policy team, we are working together. When I say we, the different organizations, the bus riders, the folks fighting for safer sidewalks, the folks fighting for better biking, we're getting together now and we're talking about what does reinvestment look like, and making sure that we are creating investment that is equitable across the board and benefits everyone. So the more partners we have at the table having that discussion, the broader our reach.